Good morning, everyone. I'm Vince Dinoto, the director of the Geotech Center, and let me welcome you to day 2 of the GeoEd conference. As we look at day 2, it will look a lot like what we did in day 1. We will have a guest speaker this morning, and we'll introduce Joseph in just a moment. We will then have a breakout session of 3 concurrent sessions. We will come back for a midday, depending on the time zone, session on awardees of the Geotech Center. And then we'll end the day with another 3 workshop concurrent session in the afternoon, followed by, again, a virtual happy hour. So that will be sort of our day for day 2 of the GeoEd conference. We appreciate you attending virtually, and hopefully you will have enjoyed what you got yesterday and what you'll get again today. So for this morning, our keynote speaker is Joseph Kursky. He's with Esri as an education manager. Joseph is a very good friend of the Geotech Center, has been very supportive of the work of the Geotech Center, and serves on our National Visiting Committee. I'll allow Joseph to describe whatever else he would like to tell you about himself, and I don't want to take any more of his time up, so I'll turn it over to you, Joseph. I'll release my screen and you should be able to share your screen.
Greetings all. Thank you, Vince. Thank you everyone for having me today. Much appreciated. As Vince said, I am a longtime fan of the Geotech Center and the GeoEd community, and knowing many of you and having great respect for all of you, it is indeed a great honor to be here. What I hope to do with you all is to lay out some key things to think about over these next 3 hours that we have together. Just kidding, we don't have 3 hours. But in the short time that we have together this morning, and for those of you that are watching this later on, I just ask you to think about the following. What do you want to see in society? That might seem like a larger than the GeoEd community, but I submit to you all that it is not. Because you in education have a key role to play, as we'll talk about. And therefore, if we want to see certain goals and visions in society, how then should education be structured to achieve these goals? I have 2 tenets that I wanted to share with you. First of all, I believe, despite dire articles out there, that education will continue as a powerful means of achieving a vibrant society. I truly believe that. And I truly believe that you are the visionaries to make it happen. Secondly, I believe that Geo Technologies will continue as a relevant set of tools, data, and ways of thinking, right? It's a methodology. It's an approach to seeing the world, right? It's not just a bunch of just tools. It's not just data. It's an approach. So I do believe that, despite, again, articles that you probably have seen from times past that say, oh, Geo Technologies is not going to be a thing in the future. So those are my 2 tenets. Now, I know some of you are 2-year college instructors, some are administrators, there's some students, some are 4 years, some are K-12 educators, some of you are in government, some are nonprofits, some are in industry. But no matter what your background is, I think there's value in focusing on what to teach and how to teach it, which is going to be running through this presentation, with an understanding of what those students will do, and with that knowledge that you are encouraging them to journey down the path of. I'm going to focus on community, technical, tribal colleges here, but I believe all of us can benefit from some of these thoughts and considerations, and then, okay, charting a course forward to 2030. My goal is to make this presentation 3 R's: relevant, rigorous, and rocking, okay? Those are my 3 goals. Now, why should you listen to me? Why should we care about what Joseph says about this? Well, I'm one of you, okay? I'm in the community, and I have had the great honor of having toes in 4 major sectors of society. So much of my career was in federal agencies, USGS, Census Bureau. I helped build the Tiger system at the Census Bureau. It was a huge leap forward for all of us, and it was a great thrill to be a part of that. I worked for Esri, Environmental Systems Research Institute, on the education industry team, which I think many of you know is completely dedicated. Our mission is to support all the good work that you folks are doing in education. I also like I think many of you, love to teach. And so I have toes in the academic waters. I teach at the University of Denver, Elmhurst College, North Park University. I've taught at a couple of other places in the past as well. And also in the nonprofit world with some professional societies. So, okay, that's some of my journey. Think about your own pathway and what you can bring to your students and your fellow faculty as we go forward here. Now, we're all about space and place. That's why Vince encouraged you to share where you are. We're all about the where, aren't we, folks? And so this is my photograph that I think best epitomizes the location where I am. Think about what photograph would you choose if you just had one photograph, because space and place gives us our perspective and a grounding for why and what we teach. We're very place-oriented, and I think that's part of the reason why some of us feel a bit uneasy, right, in our current situation where we can't get out to see each other. We can't travel as much as we would like to at the current time. Now, this shows the boundary between the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains. So I'm at the edge of two major ecoregions, which is one of the reasons why I picked this photograph. The second reason is that big bank cloud that you see up above there. When we have that in the fall, winter, and spring, it is always a sign of fair weather. We get that lenticularis cloud anchored there for days, and that's fair weather. And then the third reason why I picked it is that it shows some of the recreational opportunities. And like many of the areas that you live in, people love getting outside in Colorado. So horseback riding, I happened to be on my bicycle when I was taking this picture. But again, the natural world that we love to get out in. I go way back with this. So if I look at my photographs, if you'll just bear with me for a moment, think about what you have been interested in your lifetime. It may not be the same interest that your friends, for example, had when you were a child. So my photographs are all like this. They're people, sure, in some parts, but they're mostly infrastructure. They're mostly the natural terrain. So I would get into buildings, I would go into hospitals and banks, and to get an angle of my community where I grew up, to get that specific angle of the sun and that perspective on the city. And I also drew maps. Maybe some of you did as well, or you loved maps when you were a kid and you still do. So my maps are on big poster board from when I was a teenager and a younger person even, with downtown urban renewal districts, harbors, ports, railroads, parks, etc. I was so geeky with my maps that what are these numbers in the margins of these maps? They're address ranges. What kid cares about address? What kid knows about address ranges? Okay, you've done some geeky things too. Embrace it and make it a part of your story. Now, getting a bit more serious here, Geo Technologies, I know you share this, are not just a good thing to teach in primary, secondary, community college, technical college, tribal college, university, lifelong learning, libraries, museums. They're not just good tools to teach. They're not just useful because students get careers in them. They are absolutely essential for a sustainable, healthier, happier world, right? That's really what drives us forward. So when people say, well, why are you folks so excited about teaching and learning with spatial technologies? This is exactly why, right? We truly believe that this is key to society and moving forward to the year 2030, which is only 9.5 years from now. So how do we chart our course forward? But this is really what drives us forward, is the core reason why we believe that this is important. Now, I don't need to tell this community, but as you have experienced over the last 4 months, if people didn't know what a dashboard was in February, they certainly know what it is now, right? They certainly know what an interactive web map is now. They certainly know what an infographic is now, etc. Correct? Because they've consumed maps like this and charts and infographics by the millions per hour. So it is a key time. Sadly, it happened, but it is a key moment for us in the world of geotechnologies. Never before have people depended on these resources in such a great quantity. And when you think about it, spatial thinking is behind all of the decisions that people are making right now, right? So for example, How do we open up businesses? Where do we open up businesses? In which locations? And it's all spatial in thinking. And you folks dealing with your disruptive campuses, spatial approaches are fundamental, right? How do we structure a dormitory or a classroom or a university commons, etc.? Planning that transition is, once again, a fundamentally spatial task. If nothing else, people know what a buffer distance is now, right? In the general community, right? They've got that 6-foot buffer distance they're thinking about as they're walking around. So again, key moments for us in geotechnology education. I believe that you have a very key role in this because you're providing focused, professional, affordable education that reflects but also anticipates workforce demand. So we're not just resting on our past laurels, we're looking forward to, okay, if society is changing, education is changing, needs change, how do we therefore chart our way forward? That's what I want to encourage us to think about as a community. I say all of us. What do we want the landscape to look like and how can we lead the way? I also want to just lay out before you 5 forces that I believe bring us to this key moment. First of all, geo-awareness. People are aware of issues that you and I have cared about for years, but now the general public is talking about not just health, but water, energy, natural hazards, right? The bushfires in Australia, etc. So the awareness is at an all-time high. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, that's all about raising awareness. People are talking about those things. Now, sure, many trends are going in the wrong direction, but hence spatial thinking, spatial data, geotechnologies, and education. Now, Alistair Bonnet talks about geography being about human survival. It is critical. So that's the thread that I want to run through this. Geo-enablement. People are enabled to use geotechnologies as never before, right? On their phones, for example, they're using at least some geotechnology, GPS, satellite imagery, even to find the local public library or their grandmother's house, etc. So people are enabled to use geotechnologies as never before. GIS is a transformational technology. It's not just like it was in the early days. It was sort of doing maps in a digital way that we used to do with paper. And now we can make maps on the computer now. It's much more than that now, right? It's not replicating what we did in the past. It is moving in a completely innovative set of directions, being plural. Now, sure, GIS is spreading into new fields, as we'll talk about later. Health, business, sociology, but oh so slowly. And how can we encourage that to be a little bit more rapid? GIS is enabling new fields. Geodesign, for example. The MOOCs, massive open online courses, have opened thousands of people's eyes to maps are not just paper, film, or even digital reference documents. Where is something, but why things are where they are. And how should they be? How should they be? So planning for the future. And finally, the geotechnologies right in the center there. GIS is moving, as you have probably read in the past, from a system of records, light poles, trees, parcels, right, to a system of engagement, engaging the community. Geotechnologies are enabling things like smart cities, smart planet. Mike Goodchild recently wrote about GIS as a service, right? Feeding data from, being able to be fed data from the Internet of Things, for example. That's an interesting concept, GIS as a service. Geotechnologies are what Michio Kaku, in his book, The Physics of the Future, talks about a planetary society type 1. It enables this kind of smart planning, smart growth, sustainable futures. Interesting. Citizen science, huge, and becoming ever more so for various reasons we'll talk about. Finally, storytelling with maps. There are 1.25 million, as of 2 weeks ago, story maps. 1.25 million of a wide variety of scales and a wide variety of themes, but it just shows you how people are embracing. And sure, there are other story maps. It's not just storymaps.arcgis.com. Right? There's visualizations as well, and the boundary between maps and visualizations is increasingly blurred, and that's great. But 1.25 story maps alone, that is huge, not just in terms of number, but the impact. Okay, what am I presenting here? This is a story map, right? You knew I'd do that. You knew I'd present with a story map. This is a story map right here. It's available on this GeoNet post that I wrote a couple days ago. So if you look at GeoNet, you'll see the workshop from yesterday that I taught in ArcGIS Online Analytical Tools, and also the keynote for today, okay? Hopefully everybody's still with me. So those are the 5 forces that I submit are important as we move forward. No surprise to you all, GIS has survived multiple IT major changes, right? Many mainframes, mini computers, PCs, standalone workstations, cloud. It has pervaded and thrived, actually, despite all of these major disruptions which could have somehow derailed it. It's survived because people are still asking the where question. Donde, right? They're asking the where question, and it remains important and will remain ever more so important as we face the coming years. This platform, GIS as a platform now, enables people to map, right? Sure. But oftentimes, as maybe you've encountered as well, people will say, hey, Joseph, I've got my data on the map. And I'll say, great. And the map is only the first step. I just want to nudge you forward. The map is not the end goal. And now you'll be tweeting this out. Joseph said the map is not the end goal. Exactly. It is the understanding that comes from mapping your data and visualizing it in new ways and running spatial stats on it, etc. It's the understanding that we gain. That's what's key. And as organizations adopt this platform, because GIS has migrated into this cloud-based environment, you're seeing all sorts of innovations in decision-making and people being empowered to use it. So I think that that's a major leap forward. Another thing that I wanted you to think about is because it's a platform, you have the capability of doing the following. So you saw this dashboard from Johns Hopkins. Who hasn't, right? Most of the planet has actually seen this. Another encouraging educational note is that maybe some of you were on this as well. There was a webinar a couple weeks ago where the student, the graduate student, and that student's professor were on from Johns Hopkins talking about how the graduate student had devised this. So encourage students to think about, hey, you know what? A student actually created this. And it's incredibly useful for a variety of scales. But this dashboard is something that I want you to think about in this next segment. And that is, I've got a illustration here of a walkability story map. So here's my walkability story map. I'm really passionate about walkable communities. When I used to go to your campus there, Vince, I walked around Louisville quite a bit, walked in both of your local parks there. So I'm very passionate about that. I've got a story map that talks about walkability. I also, inside the story map, have a survey 123. The survey 123 asks people, hey, is this location where you are right now walkable or not? Rate it, tick all the choices that describe it. Is it dangerous? Does it have a wide path, etc.? Where is it? And then do you have a photograph of it? So back on my story map, I have a link to the survey. And then in the story map, I actually have the live interactive web map, right, where I can see what the walkability is of different places around the planet that I and other people have submitted to my survey. So this is live until I, the author, turn off the survey. This will continue to receive data. And finally, and most germane to this discussion, is my dashboard that I actually have inside the story map. So we've got dashboard and story map workshops here at Geo Ed. So if you want to learn more, there's no shortage of good people out there that in this community that can help you along. But in here, this dashboard took me, it's got 386 points. You can see the results of my survey inside. This is still inside my story map. So it's combining 4 different parts of the GIS platform: a story map, an interactive map, a survey, and a dashboard. Now this dashboard took me about an hour and a half to make. This dashboard took several days to make. The point is, you're empowering the students to use these same tools that are being used in health, transportation, planning, natural resource management, etc. That's, to me, the power of this, is you are empowering the students to use these same tools. And another powerful message is that these tools are accessible. easy to use, and shareable. So a lot of powerful messages there, I think. Think about this for a moment. What if we had the capability of, from this video on a typical university campus, capturing every tree, every light pole, every sign, every condition of pavement, every curb, every type of window, the condition of the buildings, how much heat they're giving off, etc., from a single video like this? Well, guess what? That technology is available now, right? It is part of the machine learning and artificial intelligence thread that is running into and intersecting with GIS. Really exciting times. That has pretty big implications for our community. For example, what kinds of entry-level GIS jobs will people have? They're not going to be gathering parcels and light poles. No, that's all automatically going to be gathered in a very short time from now. So therefore, those jobs, and therefore what do we teach those students to embrace when they go into a career that GIS is a part of? They may not necessarily have GIS as their job title, but they'll be natural resource planner, they'll be city manager, whatever, health professional. But they'll be using these tools, and their first entry into this won't be the traditional things that they've had in the past. And that's actually a good thing, because some of those jobs, as you well are aware, were quite tedious. So that's hopefully going to free up those people in the workplace to do analysis and to do other things and not have to gather. Be critical of the data, which is going to run through this as well. Some of you have used tools like this one, Mapillary, where you've got the ability to move through the landscape and kind of create a Google Earth, Google Street View type of navigation through citizen science generated, instead of relying on the Google Vans or the Google trail cams. So Mapillary. Also related to this, there is a tool called ArcGIS, AR, Augmented Reality GIS, and it allows you to take your ordinary phone and move through, let's say, a university or college campus and see what's underneath the pavement, because you've got a feature service that is now displaying in your phone. So think about that in terms of transformation with GIS being connected to these major information technology trends. In other words, GIS is not just this sort of niche thing that's over in the corner. Oh, you want a map? You want some spatial analysis done? Go see the GIS people. They're down the hall, and they're in the basement, and they're kind of geeky and nerdy, but they're good people, and they'll help you. It's rapidly evolving away from that, where the GIS people are this sort of niche group that they kind of talk to them, amongst themselves, but they're not really connected to the larger organization. Now GIS is being valued throughout the organization as never before. And that, to me, is pretty exciting times. So one of the things that I wanted you to think about is also 5 key trends in GIS. Now, just like other lists on the internet, these are debatable. The 5 coolest places to see in Kentucky, Vince, before you retire. The 5 coolest bands of all time, etc. Subject to debate, and that's fine. I welcome your comments on this. But 3D, it makes sense that we have 3D analysis tools because we have a 3D world, and we want to be able to look at things, not just elevation, but population, crime, other variables in 3 dimensions. Again, not just because the tools exist, but because it might help us to understand the patterns, relationships, and trends that we couldn't understand very well in 2D, okay? Thinking about the issues that I laid out earlier. Okay, if you're going to reopen your campus in some way, you need to have some 3D building models, and that reflects on the number 2 item, building information management, computer-aided drafting and design, and the architecture, engineering, and construction merging with GIS, right? GIS people were always really good at watersheds and population mapping and so on and so forth. And the interior space mapping was always traditionally done by the CAD people, the engineering people. And now with the blending, the merging of those 2 worlds, aided in no small part by the ESRI president, Jack Dangerman, and the Autodesk president getting together and say, hey, we need to be working together. We need to be developing joint tools that allow people to look at interior spaces and exterior spaces in the same kind of environment. One illustration, what if there was some sort of weather incident on a campus at 3 p.m. on a Friday? Where are the students? Where are the faculty? Where are the emergency exits? Where are the emergency shelters? We've got to have those building models integrated into our campus map. Absolutely, it's a no-brainer. But traditionally, right, they've been sort of separate. It's kind of like 30 years ago when the remote sensing communities and the GIS communities were it's sort of like Spanish and Portuguese. They understood a few of the same words, but they was largely not working together. And that's pretty exciting to me. Also, real-time data and analytics, big data and IoT, the Internet of Things. So I talked about that just a little bit ago, but think about, people want data in real time now, right? They want to be able to know, what is the situation with COVID-19 right now? What is the wildfire perimeter right now? What is the stream gauge right now in that stream down the street from my university campus? They want to have it in real time or near real time wherever possible. And now with GIS being not this niche technology, but being more connected to mainstream computer trends, that is increasingly possible. And therefore, again, thinking about, okay, therefore, what do we need to teach and how do we need to teach it? Enterprise and web GIS. Enterprise, what I mean by that is GIS being valued throughout the organization and being people in an organization like a city government, for example, empowered to use some aspect of the geospatial technology cloud. And web GIS opened up many, many doors, right? Also, it lends some uncertainty, as we'll talk about in a moment. Artificial intelligence and machine learning. These are just some trends that I want us to think about as we go forward here. Let's think about this. What about the following? You've got the ability now in your geographic information system to look at things in different ways. And one illustration of that is you've got the ability to create, for example, bins, hexagons, for example, to aggregate your data in new ways. Okay, for example, traffic accidents. But you also have the ability to do this kind of thing where we can look at extruding these hexagons into cylinders, so to speak, where we can slice and dice and look at things. Okay, do we see hot spots, in this case in accidents? But what if this was pH? What if this was litter, invasive species, other things that you might care about? We can not just visualize, but to help do something about it. Remember that geographic inquiry process that we all hold near and dear, asking a geographic question, gathering data, analyzing the data. But remember that last piece is making a decision. So the goal, right, the end goal is always to, okay, if this is a hot spot here, in this particular case, what does that mean? What do we do about that part of our city that has a hot spot, in this case, a statistically higher incidence of crashes at certain periods of day, maybe certain times of the week? So we've got the ability to do that now. It's really exciting. Now, that all being said, do you have your elevator speech? Despite all of these things that I just mentioned, I still think it's important for you to have your elevator speech, your 1 minute, your 3 minute, your 5 minute speech for your dean, your provost, your community members, your board of directors, whoever it might be that you have. Hey, you got to go down the hall and tell them why your job actually matters, because there are budgetary considerations right now in our organization. We've got Google Maps on my phone. Why do we need you, geospatial professional? So you still need to, despite all these advances and the 5 forces I talked about, geo enablement, etc., I believe you still need your elevator speech. And if you need some examples, I've got some on my Our Earth YouTube channel of me in actual elevators. So let me lay out this before you. Some of you recognize this. This is an old Mac. It's an old Mac computer. It's now a doorstop, okay, taken in an actual high school. Why did I take this picture? I use it as an illustration for, don't get too attached to your tools, your hardware, even your GIS software. Those will change. They may not be a doorstop, but they might be a paperweight someday, the hardware that you near and dear carry around with you. At some point, it'll be obsolete in the not too distant future. So again, focus on the spatial thinking and the analysis that we want to have students equipped with. That is really the goal. Now, I recognize that there was at one time, maybe some of you know these days, in the not too distant past, when there was pretty much just one, with some variation, way of teaching GIS. And to be sure, there were some creative, variations on the theme. But nowadays, we've got so many choices, and that's good, but there's also this sort of thread of uncertainty in the academic community. So my colleagues and I, and perhaps you as well, get calls, emails, other contact from colleagues saying, what do I teach in my Enviro 101 course now with regards to how do I use geotechnology? What do I teach in my GIS intro or intermediate course now? There are lots of choices, right? Do I have the students go out in the field first week and collect data and then bring it in and analyze it? Do I have them make a story map week 2? Yes, there are choices. And so there's not one right way of doing it. Again, think about these choices giving us an opportunity to kind of step back and say, okay, the world is changing, GIS is changing, society is changing, education is changing. How do we then think about our goals for the future? I know that change is difficult, but if we in the academic community aren't keeping up with the workforce's level of technology adoption and use, we're doing a disservice to our students, and we don't want to do that, right? That said, though, I just want to give you a note of encouragement that first of all, you don't have to be using the latest version of every single piece of software, okay? The students will encounter all kinds of variations in the workplace. I used to work at US Geological Survey, as I mentioned. We'd never had the very latest version of ArcGIS, for example. That's okay. Okay, so don't get overstressed about the latest and greatest software. Keep the spatial thinking. Sure, you want to be using some what I call modern GIS, this cloud-based environment with apps, with field apps, with coding, as I'll talk about on the next hour. Just kidding, we don't have another hour, etc. But so you want to be teaching modern GIS tools, but don't get overstressed about the actual version of whatever you're using. Now the workforce is changing, right? We need more brave, active educators like yourselves and students working with GIS. Those students need to be equipped to learn on their own and to be a part of one or more learning communities. That's another key thing that I wanted to just share with you. Okay, I would just impart in response to people that you probably have heard this as well, occasionally say, you're just teaching these tools. No, we've never just taught the tools. It's never been about just teaching geocoding, buffering, georegistering an image, etc. It's always done in context and with content. Earthquakes, water, energy, natural hazards, population change, right? We've always done it in context of an actual real-world scenario, lesson, issue, problem, correct? We're also teaching not just the geotechy skills. We're teaching communication skills. We're teaching how to be organized. The geospatial technology competency model that you all created, I use it all the time. I always like to use that bottom part of the pyramid to start with. Are you organized? Are you ethical? Can you deal with data, etc.? So use that as a framework for building your courses. And for those of you that are not familiar with it, this is the community to find out about it. And also the geographic perspective that runs through all of our instruction, whether we're teaching with GIS in environmental studies, business, economics, etc. course, or we're actually teaching GI science. Either way, I submit to you all that we're always about these 3 legs of the stool. So the tools are changing, but the workforce is also changing, correct? The job landscape, for example, I would encourage you to look at these in your planning. Look at the bigger picture of what's happening. You can see emerging roles, data analysts, scientists. We'll talk about data science programs here in a minute. These are the kinds of, what are declining? You can see as well as I can, those according to the World Economic Forum. It's always about according to the data that you're looking at, GIS or otherwise. So look at different sources for sure, but these are, I think, very instructive. So these forces are having vast impact on the work and skills landscape. Sure, on the one hand, technologies bring opportunities. On the other hand, there's a growing concern for the impact of automation, for example, on jobs. So, okay, what does that mean again for our instruction? We can build communities of action, develop insights and recommendations, curating action for systems change. So you can see here, you might want to take a look at this World Economic Forum link that I've got in here. So Changing world of work, absolutely. Let me submit a short set of things to think about. You can read these as well. Yeah, there's transformation, but there's a net positive outlook in all of the reports I've looked at for jobs amidst the disruption, even including the disruption in the last 4 months. One of the things that I love about several of these recommendations that I see are that I've seen are very key to what you and I love, and that is lifelong learning, right? Information and communication technologies, you can see the growth in different charts. Adoption of new technology are trends driving industry growth. Cloud technology, GIS being a key part of that, etc. And okay, what jobs are declining then? If some are increasing, which ones are declining? And how do we deal with that, and how do we teach with it? So the tools are changing, the workforce is changing, and education is also changing, not just in the last 4 months, but as you know from being immersed in it, for your careers, short as they may have been or long as they may have been, the education landscape is changing. So therefore, what should students learn in geotechnologies? Is it overlay? Is it coding? Is it Python? Is it field and office apps, or all of the above? Well, we and your students have a vast opportunity of a vast array of learning materials at their fingertips. You might take a look at David DiBiase's Stop Teaching GIS. He has a provocative title on that essay, and I think the reason why is because he wanted people to think about, as I do, changing how some of the courses and approaches have been. It's not ever been about teaching geocoding. It is always in context, why we do what we do, okay? But his point was, let's teach problem solving. And geotechnologies, the spatial thinking approach, is a key part of that, helping students learn how to learn. Now, I've just transformed 10 of my ArcMap lessons into ArcGIS Pro, for example. And it's a good illustration for, I think, where things are moving. And as GIS evolves, ArcGIS Pro just being one example, GIS becomes more powerful and easier to use at the same time. So you've got a double advantage. If your GIS is not becoming easier to use over time, then you need to check with your GIS provider. You know, why aren't they becoming easier to use? Because it should be. So as instructors, you have choices, right? You use your own lessons or you use someone else's lessons, or a combination of the two. If you use your own, you're going to have to curate as time goes on, as many of you are maybe painfully aware. But use the transformations in the evolution of GIS as a way of improving and reinventing your courses and programs. I would just implore you, for example, to not create these very long, and I say this to myself too, very long GIS-based lessons. In part for these 3 reasons here. The workflows are much more wizard-driven. Hey, if I want to join my data to the ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World, I hit that join button and it guides me through. Yeah, I need to understand the data and I need to understand what joining is, but I don't need to screenshot all that stuff for in my lesson, because the tools are very wizard driven and there are other resources. If students get stuck, it's like you at home. You watch Bob's faucet video if you want to fix your faucet. You know, maybe in my case I watch it 10 times, I finally get it, but you watch it. Right? You go out to other resources. Same thing with students getting stuck. You don't actually have to do what we had to do in years past, which is have every single guidance in our lessons, because that was all they had. And so we had to do that. Now we don't have to do that. Also, the modern learning style. You may have this really precious long lesson that's near and dear to your heart. The students are going to read that whole thing. They're going to skip to the parts that they know are important. Also, you're setting yourself up for this curation nightmare. If you have lots of screenshots and lots of detail in there that is actually replicated in online help and so on, you're just going to have nothing to do in the future but constantly revise as the cycle of updates of GIS tools gets more and more frequent, of revising your lesson. Don't go there. I just implore you not to do that. And I say that same thing to myself. Who needs to know which components? I like this particular recent article by Ricker and some of you know Hackley and a couple of others here perhaps. but it's a nice diagram about tools, tool makers, and scientists. Who needs to know which things and what combination? So that's one of the things I want to encourage you to think about. Is GIS too hard? Yes, it is hard. It's still hard. No matter how easy the tools get, it's still a system. It's definitely worthwhile though. Hard, yes, worthwhile. Just like chemistry. Hard, yes, worthwhile, yes. I would encourage you to look at this story map from a student that recently submitted this at a high school level using drones, GIS, a survey combination in a story map. So kind of like my walkability story map, uniting these different components into a really powerful story. I also encourage you to look at this right whales example, our right whales dying in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. What I like about this, and this is a middle school student, at the end, she put in, what can we do about it? So again, geographic inquiry coming to the action part. What can we do about it? Yeah, this is hard, but I was looking at Mr. Bushland's students, looking over the shoulder of his students in Saxe High School in Texas not too long ago. And he was one of those educators that, like you all, learn along with the students, encourage them to fly, saying, yes, this is hard, using animation software, for example, and GIS, but we're going to tackle it. We're going to do it. And the students were motivated, and they were right in there. And I thought to myself, GIS is not anywhere near as hard as this animation software is. Oh my gosh, there are like 300 tools in your face at once. But here's my tiny little secret, folks, and that is we need to hasten this whole Rogers diffusion of innovations. We're not going to do it by just working with our own peeps, okay? Environmental scientists, GIS people, geographers, city planning, you know, those departments on our campuses. We've got to get the business students, the economics students, the sociology students. Now I realize that most of you are not paid to be the GIS evangelist on your campus, but you're very passionate about it. And so there are some things that I've got in this presentation. I'm not going to cover them all, but concrete ways for you to go, okay, I've got 15 minutes with the business school. Here's what the things that I could do. I could use Business Analyst Web. I could have them look at consumer behavior. I could cite the optimal location for a certain business. I could look at supply chain, risk assessment, etc. So I've got some concrete things in here. I just wanted to let you know that the landscape of GIS in education is advancing, but if we really want to get onto the steep part of the curve and have more adoption, we've got to be working with those other disciplines. Okay. My contention is that some students need to know a lot of GIS. All students need to know some GIS. Yes, even those business students. They may not care about map projections. I hope they care a little bit. They want to map their data. They want to map it now. Okay? So focused, applied geospatial technology for location analytics. Okay. Implications, real world examples, students that can think critically and spatially, etc. How do we expand? Okay, I've got a video called Don't Camp Out in One GIS Campground Forever. You might want to take a look at that. Perhaps that would give you a couple of concrete ideas. I would also say work with the emerging data science programs on your campus. The G part is a critical part of data science. A lot of the data science programs are being formed right now, so it's a key time for you to sort of get in those meetings and say, the G part is important. We've been data scientists even before data scientists was actually a phrase, right? You and I in geospatial technology. So make sure that G component is in there. Make sure that you're telling people that geospatial is not just a niche thing. There are links, for example, the ArcGIS bridge. Make sure that they know that geospatial is a key way of understanding different phenomena at different scales. Yes, work with the computer science programs. Gone are the days when students can sort of go into GIS without doing any coding, right? As GIS has emerged into this cloud-based software as a service environment, there are ways to encourage students to think like a computer. I usually start them off with arcade scripts. I've got some examples in this presentation that you can take a look at. Simple 1 or 2 line arcade scripts are, yes. Then continue with some of the tutorials on the ArcGIS developer site. Go to Stack Exchange, look at GeoNet for some, and the really exciting thing, using Jupyter notebooks, the Python notebooks inside Pro, and very soon inside plain old regular old ArcGIS Online. Go and add that notebook, then you've got your notebook window inside there. So there's nothing to install. There's no libraries to go get and connect to your GIS. It's all running right inside your GIS. You can do this kind of stuff. This is really transformational. I wish I could get excited about it. Okay. Also consider connecting components, as I illustrated with my walkability. Connect these different pieces in powerful ways. Partner with agencies. Okay. Think about using ArcGIS Hub, for example, to have your students building hubs and also helping communities that are now saying, we need to build one of those. Because again, GIS is not being just a system of a record, it's a system of engagement, and I think Hub is a key way of actually making that happen. Not the only way, certainly, but a key way. Also, I just encourage the community to rekindle your innovation in microcredentials and certifications. Absolutely. I think there's been a little bit of momentum lost there, but I think in this decade we need to rekindle that. Use the current disruption, for example, to incorporate some of these cloud-first solutions. So here, for example, I've got some polygons I digitized in ArcGIS Online, completely cloud-based. Didn't have to go to Pro or anything like that. If I want to go there, yeah, there are some virtualization options. I recognize there are some challenges there. But there are many things that you can do with these cloud-based solutions that Business Analyst Web, ArcGIS Online, ArcGIS Insights, ArcGIS Urban, nothing to install, any device, anywhere, anytime. Also, there's an increasing use of surveys tied to maps, Survey 123, for example, as research tools in a university. Tap into that. Encourage people, hey, you've used Google Forms, you've used SurveyMonkey. Why not use Survey 123, for example, and then you've got a spatial connection to the data that you're gathering in your research project. So you can take a look at what University College London is doing, for example. Also, I encourage you in our closing minutes here to work with your campus administration. I know some of you are, but I want to encourage the rest of you. Campus safety, facilities management, now more than ever, people are thinking about those things. You can build support for GIS programs by working with your campus sustainability initiatives as well. So for example, at Texas A&M, they've got a sustainability, every university's got a sustainability initiative. Tap into that. The dining one at UMass, take a look at that. They've got an actual story map that tells about it. Also, I encourage you to use the ESRI campus mapping program as a project for your students. You've got a client, which is the global community consuming the maps in ArcGIS Online that is now going to be using your base map that you generated of your campus, and also an internship generator. You're seeding possible internships in organizations locally through that. There are some great examples. If you take a look at some of the links that I have here, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, they have a multi-set of maps, and you can see their journey. They started with this phase 1 story map. They went to the phase 2 story map, which is right here. But the point is they're using the base mapping program, the campus mapping program. This is just right inside ArcGIS Online, and they've got the things that they've digitized, how they organized it in terms of different students working on which parts of the base map, etc. I highly encourage you to take a look at that. It's one of the primo examples, and I just love what they're doing. Because they talk about, hey, there are some challenges, organizational challenges, but it was worth doing. And now what they've also done is that they've incorporated some of the COVID businesses opening and closing, etc. in there. Also, partner with your campus library. I'm very encouraged by what I'm seeing in the academic community. I, in not too distant past, visit between 30 and 40 campuses a year. And in many of those campuses that I would visit every year, I would see geospatial librarians being funded and supported and being the key for spreading GIS throughout the campus. It's very encouraging, and I would just encourage you to work with your campus librarians. Okay, other non-traditional forces, if you want some inspiration, I do have a Geo Inspirations column. Actually, many of you are featured in my column, so thanks for being willing to do that. But just share this with your students. Share these Geo Inspirations, because it's people from a wide variety of walks of life and backgrounds and industries, but are making a key difference. I also want to just remind you that professional societies are good ways for your students to be connected to not only the Geo mentor community, but as a pathway forward. So just in closing, I would just submit this to you all. Here are what I consider to be the top 5 skills for geotechnology professionals and instructors and students. First of all, be curious. Be curious. It leads to tenacity. You're really passionate about getting that problem solved in whatever GIS tools you're using. You're asking good questions. Oftentimes students aren't used to asking questions, right? They've come up through an educational system where they're actually not really encouraged to ask questions, right? Standardized testing and all the other things that we could talk about. But being curious about the world and going beyond what your professor is even asking you to do, I think is key. Also, being able to be working with data. Some of you know I've got this Spatial Reserves data blog. And in that blog, I talk about where to find data, how do you know if it's any good, but also societal issues, copyright, privacy, location privacy, etc. Okay, so that I'm very passionate about having students in ArcGIS Online. Hey, within a minute, right? If we had a minute, which we don't, we could build a map, pull in 3 or 4 different layers, and start doing analysis. Do you know where all those layers came from? Who created them? Why were they created? What scale were they created at? Interesting. So I really want students to be critical of data, not just accept it because it's a map, but really be critical of the data quality issues, but also how it's presented, how it's classified, how it's symbolized. We had a discussion last night where Ann Johnson and others were talking about, you know, cartography still matters, symbolization, classification, the way that you're, now more than ever, because, right, you're sharing these maps oftentimes with your university, college community, or with the globe. So you need to be careful about the data sources and also how you're presenting the data and showing the issue and the problem that you're trying to tackle. So I'm really keen on being able to work with data and being critical of the data. Yes, I love USGS data. I love census data. I love WHO data. It all has its imperfections, and know what those are. And also, on a related note, understand the ethical implications of what you're doing. I think this is going to be increasingly important as people are consuming maps and spatial data on a wider basis and in more disciplines than ever before in this decade that we're in right now. Okay? Number 3, know your geographic and geotechnical foundations. We talked about this a bit last night in the happy hour, and I think that's still important. The skills, the spatial stats I talked about, the coding, projections, analysis, classification, but also the content knowledge. Remember that 3-legged stool that I mentioned, and the geographic perspective. 4th, adaptability I think is really important. Being flexible, being willing to go outside your comfort zone, whether in a conference, for example, going to something that's completely, you don't know anything about. I've challenged myself to do the same thing. So at conferences, I would go to at least one session that was completely outside of my sort of knowledge-based comfort zone. Encourage your students to do the same thing, whether it's a virtual or a face-to-face conference, and also be willing to go perhaps international, again, way outside of their regional comfort zone. And finally, good communications, I think, is so key here. Again, as more and more people are consuming spatially related data, think about your elevator speech. You're probably going to be asked to give it. This is, in sum, I think, an exciting decade. We have incredible opportunities. We have incredible data. We have incredible people, you all in the community and others. You have a key role in achieving our goals for education and then broader society. A spatially enabled, spatially literate citizenry that can make wise, smart, healthy decisions about our future. That's our goal, right, is these wise decisions. And I, in closing, believe that you folks are the ones that are going to make it happen. So circling back to our anchoring in place, guess where this is? Maybe you can share it in the chat box. Again, I just want to encourage you. This is an extremely uncertain, disruptive time, but it's also a very opportune time for those of us that care about the planet, care about people, and care about spatial technologies for a brighter future. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph, for wonderful, wonderful presentation. I do really appreciate you doing this. We are almost up to the hour time where we're moving into session 1 for day 2. We have 3 concurrent sessions. But Joseph, I don't know if you're able to stay in the chat room for a few moments
Yep.
And answer questions that people have while other people transition over to the sessions.
Yep.
So if there's questions for Joseph, if you'll put them into the chat window. Joseph, can you see the chat window okay?
Yes.
We'll leave this room open for 10 or 15 minutes. It also allow those who need to transition over into session 1 for day 2.
Thanks for the kind words, folks, and thank you all for inviting me. I really appreciate it, and I have great respect for this community. Onward.
Okay, there's a question there, Joseph, about notebooks. When do you introduce programming at this level?
Yeah, great question. I consider it as toward the farther end of the swimming pool. So I start with arcade scripts. I then move to multi-line arcade scripts. I then move to a couple of the tutorials in the developer site, and then I would use notebooks. Notebooks are so new inside the ArcGIS platform that I don't have a whole lot of examples yet. The examples I do have are all at the university level. I have not seen any high schools yet using them, but I know they can do it. I know they can do it. And again, the goal is not because it exists, right? The goal is what can you do with notebooks that you can't do in the regular GUI, the regular toolbox?
All right, thank you. Okay. Are there other questions for Joseph?
But yeah, like Ann is saying, it allows students to see what's going on behind every single one of these web maps. The code is right there, and you're seeing, okay, if I alter line 7, this is what happens to the map. If I alter line 8, I've got a legend. Now I've got a widget. If I alter line 9, etc. So what is actually happening behind the scenes? Yeah, I'm totally with you. A couple people are asking me about ethics and how to approach that or how to introduce that. I have a short essay on the Spatial Reserves data blog about that. These are just my own thoughts, and I welcome your feedback, but ways that I incorporate this discussion. I think it's not something that you just sort of say, okay, next Thursday, we're going to talk about ethics. You thread it throughout the analysis and the lessons, the activities that throughout the semester, throughout the program. And sure, there is a moment where you can have a initial discussion about it, but then I think it's best as sort of like the sand in a conglomerate. Let's say this is a conglomerate, this thing right here. And so the cobbles and the boulders are key subjects that we teach in our programs, but running throughout the cobbles and the boulders are grains of sand, right? And that's what I like to think about as some of these issues that we talk about. They touch all of the major issues, but they sort of unite them in, again, like maybe an imperfect analogy, but kind of like the sand in a conglomerate, taking the earth science example. No, that's great, Ann, to hear about the concept module. Yep, look forward to seeing that. Cool. That's great.
Okay. It looks like that's all the questions we have right now, Joseph. So.
All right. Well, I'm going to go dive into a session and learn alongside you all. Looking forward. And we'll be talking with you later on, right at the happy hour, right, Vince?
That is correct. Happy hour again at the end of the day. And I will end this session, and that way you can join the other session.